In psychology, there are different ways of looking at the patient or the mind or whatever, and this is always kind of the first chapter of psychology textbooks, perspectives. And I don't fully understand why these are important to learn right off the bat, but I will make a video on them because I know there are questions on tests sometimes of which perspective believes this certain way. So I'm just going to start writing them and explaining them. We have biological perspective. And this, I think you can tell by biology right there in the word, that this really focuses on sort of the physiology. Let's see, I should go back to yellow. The physiology of things, the physical attributes of an organism and what that might have to do with how their mind works. Relating biology and psychology is how I would describe this. And so this is where a psychologist who buys into the biological perspective very strongly or a lot would order an MRI. I'm gonna explain these in terms of sort of diagnostics or how people who believe different ways, psychologists who believe these different things, would go about solving a problem. But they're not mutually exclusive. I don't want to give you that idea that you're either a biological psychologist or one of the others. But it's just different ways of thinking, and you can put on different hats while you're doing this. So the next one, which is actually pretty similar, is behavioral. And the actual listings change from book to book, so I'm just going with the most common ones and trying to be comprehensive. So the behavioral psychologists, they have this model that I drew earlier, where you have a stimulus, which is something that the animal would see or hear or whatever does the stimulating, leads to this mysterious black box called their mind, and then we get a behavior out. And the behavior is just how they act. You know what behavior is. And so, if they hear a bell ring and they start to salivate, that would be a behavioral way of thinking about it. A biological way of thinking about Pavlov's dogs, the ringing bell and drooling, would be that there's some kind of chemical mechanism that leads directly from the brain to the salivatory glands. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I'm trying to distinguish these two. The biological is saying, so it's sort of mechanical, I think, that there's that just they're predetermined and chemical processes leading from one thing to the other. Behavioral is saying we know what goes in, we know what comes out, but the middle we can never really see. And moving on to cognitive, and this is the first time that we actually start thinking about what might be happening in this box. This is where the cognitive perspective comes in. Rather than saying, oh, a function of stimulus outputs behavior, we're trying to say, well, what actually goes on in there? How does memory work? How do emotions work? And so we're trying to do scientific testing. We're trying to, figure out actual mechanisms of memory and of thought process, problem solving, that type of thing. That's cognitive psychology. Moving on, we have cross-cultural, which I don't know how well it fits on this list, but it's still an interesting. It is a way of thinking about psychology. It is sort of a school of thought. Cross-cultural. Well, what does culture mean? That's the attitudes and habits of a certain group of people. And then cross means that you're going in between them and comparing them. And so if you're thinking cross-culturally, where you give the same test to people in Africa and to people in Europe and to people who all walks of life, and see what is in common between them, And so then we can say, what part of this is the basic human mind that we all truly share? We put shared versus, and what would the other thing be? It's either something that we all share or something that we are nurtured to think. Nature versus nurture, stuff like that. And this is getting important now that the world is getting smaller all the time and we have to interact with people of other cultures. We really need this cross-cultural perspective sometimes. I'm gonna switch colors again. It's all yellow and green. Okay, next up, this one I like. We have evolutionary. Evolutionary. And so this is thinking about psychology. All these are still the same psychology. It's all one field, but in the evolutionary perspective, you always start with why would this have evolved? According to natural selection, why do we think this way? Or you have to understand evolution to think of where this would come from, but it's actually related to biological again. It's sort of why would this be evolutionarily helpful? When we learn that there's an experiment done when people's faces are splashed with cold water, certain things happen to their body. They start constricting their blood vessels and their heart rate slows, and we think evolutionarily, why would that happen? Why would evolution choose for this to happen? And that's a diving reflex that happens in a lot of creatures, and it helps us stay underwater for longer so we don't drown. So I don't even know what to write. Evolutionary, you have to think about evolution. I don't know how to explain it better than that. Moving down the list, we have humanistic, which is this one I have the most trouble understanding myself. I've read about it and I can tell you what I've read, but humanistic seems to focus on the potential of humans, human potential, potential. And this is where Maslow's hierarchy of needs comes in, where you try to get self-actualized. You have to take care of basic things, and then you get the self-actualization, which maybe you've seen that video, maybe it's later in the playlist. This is about being the best human you can, and about how understanding each other can solve all your problems. And it seems kind of sunshine, puppy dogs, and rainbows to me. I don't really see why this perspective is useful, but it's on the list, so I have to at least mention it. Feel free to correct me. I'd love to find out what this actually is if I'm wrong, and if you leave a comment, you can educate other people. The last one on my little list here is psychodynamic. Psychodynamic. And this is pretty much can be simplified to just Freudian thought. This focuses on the unconscious in general, unconscious desires, and dreams, and childhood. This sort of goes with things that happen to you in childhood really impact what happens later in life. I think this all comes from Freud, to put it very simply. So there you go. And again, these are not, you don't have to grow up to be a behavioral psychologist and miss out on all the rest of them. It's just different ways of thinking, different perspectives, different tools in your toolbox of thinking in psychological terms.